Actually, we'll do this. We'll do the problem, and then we'll talk about the homework, because this lesson is really just bell work and that one problem down there. And that one problem down there can help probably several of the questions that you have from the homework. So let's do the bell work first. If I'm doing the bell work, it doesn't say I need to list anything, but I probably would regardless. Because at least I get points for knowing stuff, even if I don't know how to graph it. Because just a simple put of putting my amplitude is 1/2, and maybe I'll even put it's flipped. That 3 has to do with the period. And the period is going to be 2 pi over whatever number that is, and that's 3. Can't simplify, so let's leave it as is. Negative pi over 6, that means it's going to go right pi over 6. And that negative 1 says we're going to go down 1. That's a lot of points right there. That's a lot of points, and I didn't even do what I was supposed to do yet, because it just says sketch at least one cycle of the graph. But if you have all of that, I can give you points for that. Oh, Jack, you're here. You checked in, right?
No, there wasn't a sign-in sheet.
Oh, okay. Make sure you go down to Mrs. Reynolds, because right now you're absent. So write all that stuff down so you can get points even if you mess up the graph. All right, let's go ahead and graph this. The most important thing is the period right now to start off, because I do need to mark my x-axis. I need to write at least 4 markings on my x-axis. So I'm just going to count 1, 2, 3, 4 and put 2 pi over 3. Now, if you mess up the period and you have these marked wrong, at least you get the graph right. Right? You can graph it on the wrong period. You lose a point because the period isn't correct, but don't think just because I can't find the period, I can't graph it. You can still count those 4 tick marks and graph it as normal. All right, bless you. Bless you. All right, then we go half, multiply by 3. Well, 2 pi divided by 3, if I half that, is going to be pi over 3. Pi over 3 divided by 2 is actually pi over 3 times 2, which is pi over 6. And then we multiply by 3 to get that third one, and 3 times pi over 6 is 3 pi over 6, which is pi over 2. All right, just for the sake of this, just so you know when you're doing these, sometimes it's nice not to use all of the tick marks. So I made it 1 and 2. I actually skipped. I skipped because my amplitude is 1/2. So I'm going to be going up and down 1/2. It's a lot nicer to make a 1/2 that looks like this instead of trying to go, in there. So just because you have tick marks doesn't mean you have to use each one, or one could be a half. Sometimes each one could be a 2 if you want to zoom in on something. So don't think each tick mark has to be 1. All right, it needs to go down 1. So I'm going to move my sinusoidal axis down 1. That is our -1. All right, then our amplitude is 1/2.
Shouldn't it be on a negative? Yeah.
Yes. That's what happens when I'm zoomed in and I can't see what numbers I put on there. Because that would have been down 1/2, right?
Yeah.
There we go. That looks a little better. All right, so we're down -1. It's got an amplitude of 1/2. And it needs to go right pi over 6. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to tackle the amplitude first, and then I'll shift it after. So I'm just going to do the amplitude first, so that's -1/2. So that means it's going up and down in the negative direction. So that means sine would normally go up, but since it's negative, it's going to go down. And now all I do is have to shift it over pi over 6 units. But pi over 6 units is just 1 tick mark. So I move everything over 1 tick mark. And that's my final graph. It is shifted down. It's flipped. The amplitude's 1/2, and it shifted right pi over 6. I can check all of that right there, so I can be 90-some% sure I did it correct. Minus if you would have moved down half a tick mark for that. Yeah. And you know what? If you did that on a test, you'd be fine. If you said it goes down 1, and you set it up like this, and you moved it down 1 tick mark by accident, and it's actually a half, I probably wouldn't take any points off, because you told me how far it had to go down. You showed me how far it went down. I can just see that you just, you didn't recognize that you had that one down there. All right, questions on the bell work at all? Okay, then we're going to go through this one problem, which is kind of similar to ones that you might have had questions on. This is actually a little harder. Jack, everything good? Yeah. Okay. All right, we're supposed to write the equation in the form y equals a times sine of b, quantity x minus c plus d. So I need to know the amplitude. I need to know the period. I need to know left and right. I need to know up or down. Do you see how it says? It says specifically that it wants sine. It says specifically it wants sine. Now, if I think in my head what sine looks like, okay, it comes up, down, and then back up, or it goes down, up, and comes back up. So if you look here, it gives you way more than one cycle. This is one cycle. This is one cycle. So it's kind of like a cycle and a half. So depending on where you pick is going to change this. So we all might have slightly different answers to this one. Here's my advice to you. So since this is further than just one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick one full cycle and I'm going to cross out that. I'm going to focus on this one cycle. This one cycle of the sine function. So sine usually goes up. So the first thing I'm thinking about is that the amplitude is negative. And let's go ahead and draw our sinusoidal axis. Our sinusoidal axis is right here. Our amplitude is how high or how low it goes. So this is my amplitude. And that's going to be 1, 2. So that distance is 2. So that means our amplitude is 2. From the sinusoidal axis is 2 up and 2 down. All right, let's tackle left, right. And then up, down, and then we'll focus on the period. You want to venture a guess how far left or right I've shifted this? Yeah, Daniel.
3 pi over 4 to the left.
Is it 3 pi over 4 to the left? Should we go with that and see what it works? Left, 3 pi over 4. Well, let's check. So this is pi over 2, right? If this is pi over 2, then this is half of pi over 2, which is pi over 4. So I think so that's pi over 4 because it's half of that. This is 1 pi over 4. This is 2 pi over 4, which happens to be pi over 2. And this would be 3 pi over 4. So it is 3 pi over 4 to the left. So that can be the hardest thing on this is just reading those graphs. My advice to you is get how long a tick mark it is and just count how many you have away from it. So it is left 3 pi over 4. And if you look at the sinusoidal axis, it's down 1. So we're going to go down 1. All right, we have our amplitude. We have our shift. We have our downward and upward shift. Don't forget that it is flipped, so this will actually be a negative value out here. Now all I have to do is the period. The period is how long it takes to complete a cycle. The period is how long it takes to complete a cycle. So if we count here, we said this was pi over 4, right? Well, if this is 1 pi over 4, 2, 3, 4 pi's over 4, that's exactly 1 pi, right? Do we all agree it's 1 pi to complete the cycle? Or is it just too early to think that far? Are we okay where I came up with 1 pi? Please let me know right now. Shaking your head, no, you don't know where I got it, or? Okay, that's perfect. Okay. So I want to get this distance here. From the start of my cycle to the end of the cycle, which is this distance here. Okay? Now, to get that distance, we have to read it in these pi units kind of things. All right, so if this is pi over 2, then this right here is pi over 4. Are we okay with this tick mark being pi over 4? Because it's half of pi over 2. This distance is actually pi over 4 units. This distance is pi over 4. This distance is pi over 4. This distance is pi over 4. Do you know what I mean by the distance, I guess? You sure? Okay. So I'm just counting how many pi over 4 distances there are. So either we can do, there's another way you can do it. This is 3 pi over 4, right? This distance is 3 pi over 4. Add 1 pi over 4 to it, which would be 4 pi over 4, which is just pi units. Did I confuse you more, or is that? You sure? Okay. So that distance is pi units. So the period, and we have to talk about this, the period is pi units. But we can't put pi in for B. We can't put pi in for B because B comes from 2 pi over B. So remember the formula. Period equals, it says period. Period equals 2 pi over B. In this case, the period is pi. Yes? B is going to be equal to 2. It's not so hard in this one because B, sometimes it's harder and you actually have to solve for B, in which case you just multiply both sides by B. I'm actually going to walk through the steps. Multiply both sides by B, so you'd have 2 pi equals B times pi. You divide both sides by pi, and you come up with B equals 2. Now we have all of our values. Our A value is 2. So we'll have y equals a negative 2 because it goes down instead of up. Sign of that B value I just came up with is 2. X, in order to go left 3 pi over 4, we have to go plus 3 pi over 4. And down 1 is minus 1. The hardest one to get should be your period. This is the hardest one because sometimes it's hard to see that distance. Sometimes it's hard to calculate that distance depending on what your x values are. And what's really hard is a lot of people just want to plug pi into there. My strong advice to you, as long as you have time, check to make sure the period works out. Think to yourself, okay, period is 2 pi over this number. 2 pi over this number is pi. Yeah, everything's correct. I'd go the opposite direction just to double check. Questions on any one of those steps? All right, questions on the homework? B. Yeah, Gracie. 41. So 41 gives us 3 bits of information and asks us to come up with a formula. So it says, it gives us pi, it gives us negative pi over 2, and it gives us 3, 7. Well, this first thing is the period. The second thing is saying it needs to go left pi over 2, and this last thing is the range. Well, all the range is saying, so on a normal sine or cosine function, Gracie, it bounces between 1 and negative 1, right? It goes up to 1, and it comes down to -1. So if this was just a regular sine of x, this would be -1 and 1. So in this particular one, it's bouncing somewhere between 3 and 7. So kind of, let's do a quick drawing of what I'm talking about. Let's do that. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So picture a sine curve that just kind of, let's not make it exact, I guess. I guess we can. It does something like, it just bounces in between those two things. That's what I mean by range. 3 is the lowest it's going to go. 7 is the highest it can go. It's just going to keep bouncing in between there. We don't know how it's bouncing in there. We just know it's bouncing between those things. So since it's bouncing between those two things, our sinusoidal axis is smack dab in the middle of our range. Because your sinusoidal axis runs straight through the middle of your graph, so it's right through the middle of our range. And the halfway point between 3 and 7 is at 5. So that's your sinusoidal axis. Well, that's going to get us our amplitude. It'll get us how to shift it. And we already have our period. We only need a few things. We need 1, 2, 3, 4 letters. We need up, down, left, right, period, amplitude. So our amplitude is this distance from our sinusoidal axis to the half. So it's basically half the distance. So 3 to 7 is 4. It's half that distance, which is 2. Our amplitude is 2. The period. Period is 2 pi over b. But in this case, the period is pi. So we're going to set 2 pi over b equal to pi to get our b value equals 2. So our amplitudes are a value. We now have our b value. Our c value is left or right. They gave us our c value. They said it goes left pi over 2. So since it goes left pi over 2, that is my c value. Finally, we need our d, which is up or down. Your sinusoidal axis is your up or down. Since our sinusoidal axis is at 5, you have to shift this graph up 5 units. So it goes up 5 units, which is our d value. I have my a value, amplitude. I have my b value, which is 2. My c value, which is pi over 2. And my d value, which is 5. Now it's just writing the function. I believe they asked for a sign. Is it sine or cosine? I see some nods for sine. All right. So we're going to have y equals, my a value is 2. Now I forgot who had a -2. Was that you, Daniel? Yeah. Do you see how we don't know? It could be -2. It doesn't say that it's flipped or anything, but it doesn't say it's not flipped. All we know is it bounces between here. That's all we know. You could draw it as flipped. So a -2 would work there too. I don't want to confuse anyone. I'd keep it positive, but a negative would work there. Then we have sine of our b value is 2. Then we have x, and we're going left pi over 2, so that means it's a positive pi over 2. And then it's going to go up 5, which is plus 5. It's not as easy of a problem as it looks like, because it looks like just a little, they gave me 3 values. How hard could this be? Hard one, once again, is the period. They give you left, so you should always get your left right. Then you just have to kind of picture this in your head or draw the picture out to see what your sinusoidal axis is. Does that make more sense? Less sense? Somewhere in between? Somewhere in between? All right. Other questions? Jack.
43.
Do you just need the answer, or do you want to go through it?
No, just need it.
Okay, so the answer to 43 is 5 sine quantity pi times quantity x minus 2 plus 4. So I'll write that out. It is 5 sine of pi x minus 2 plus 4. If you didn't get that, I highly suggest you do it again because we just walked through one. I would highly suggest doing that one and then ask questions on it if you can't get those values. Because I don't feel like going over the same problem again because this is a good practice on that. Other homework questions? Hey, be very careful on questions like 37. 37 is kind of one of those trap questions because it is y equals, and I did notice some people had this mistake, cosine of 2x plus pi over 2. You have to remember, you need x minus c. If there's a b value, it has to be outside of that parenthesis. So if there's a value in front of x, it needs to be in parentheses if you're shifting left or right. And the key behind this is, if our period was 2 pi, it would move it left pi over 2. But since we're changing the period, we have to see how that affects the shift. We have to see how it affects the shift, and the only way to do that is to factor that 2 out of both of these. And quick reminder, factoring is just dividing. Distributing is multiplying, factoring is dividing. So if you bring a 2 out, you just go pi over 2 divided by 2, and then you'll have that new inside value. All right, the rest of this sheet is going to be homework. I do want to go over really quick. Am I here tomorrow? No is the correct answer, and I'm not here Friday as well. You got everything you need for today, tomorrow, Friday, and Monday. Everything is there. So not everything is homework. Homework is just that first 2 pages. So that's 39 through 42. 39 through 42. That will be due tomorrow. I'm not here to collect it, so if you don't do it, you're just kind of hindering yourself. That next sheet would be what you're working on tomorrow. So that is page 43 and 44. That's what you're working on tomorrow. And then your review. That's what you're going to work on Friday and Monday. All right, that's the pattern of things. Obviously, if you do things in advance, good on you. I'll post all of the answer keys tonight to everything. But don't overwhelm yourself and think you have to do all of this tonight. It is just the first 2 pages. The 3rd page is tomorrow, and the review is Friday and Monday. Test on Tuesday. Brody.
So we have in class on Friday and Monday to work on the review?
Yes. Yep. We don't normally have that, but since I'm not here, I want at least a day where you can ask questions on the review. And I haven't yet, and I don't plan on ever having tests on Monday. I always feel like everyone just waits till Sunday night to study it, and they realize all the stuff they don't know, and then they can't ask questions.
Okay.
Okay?